All right, hey guys, welcome to the CFO Story. I'm your host, Jason Lee, with my co-host, Sami Abboud.
Hey there, good to see you guys today.
And we are joined by the president of our organization, George Abboud.
Glad to be here.
Sami, well, first of all, let me start with the general idea behind the show and where it all came from. And guys, you guys were having this brain, like it was like a brainchild from the two of you, right?
Sure was, yeah.
So over drinks one night and thinking about, so really, Sami, why don't you tell us so everybody can get an idea, where did this idea come from?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Jason. So, when I started my career doing what I'm doing now, my first thought was maybe to kind of peel away from what I used to do as a CFO, right? And the reason for me was just to kind of get into a new track and go in a different direction. And so George and I were sitting talking about it one day, and talking about, hey, what can I do differently instead of getting kind of stuck in what I was doing, right? I'm doing a new role here. I came over to fulfill a different role with this business. And so George and I started talking, and he said, why do you need to peel away from the CFO you? Why don't you leverage it in your experience and the people that you know and the things that you've done in your background with your experience? And so we kind of came up with this idea to create this podcast and a forum. And so that's what we're doing. We're tapping into CFOs to give opportunities to hear their story and to build a network.
Yeah,
so,
if I can add to that, at the same time as we do focus on business owners, we get a lot of questions and requests. Can we spend time with their CFO, or what would you do in this scenario? And there's a lot of young CFOs out there, a little less experienced, and then there's older CFOs that are plenty experienced, but they have a limited capacity for experience share. And so at the same time, Sami, that we realize that you have all this value in the CFO spot, is at the same time the clients were asking us for help in that arena.
Fantastic. The one thing that I've observed, and I've only been at this, and this is from an outside perspective. I haven't had the chance of being a CFO like you guys, but the one thing that is consistent is wherever I go, whatever organization we're working with, everything starts and stops at the CFO's desk for the most part, right? So if there's a new rollout, or if there's a new plan, or if it's something to try out, something has to land on their desk, and so they usually are the ones getting just piled up on top of. And then the other thing that I've observed working in concert with them is it's relatively consistent, but they can sometimes be on an island, right? I mean, can you share, Sami, tell us a little bit about some of your experience. I mean, you were CFO for how long?
So I was a CFO for about 8.5 years.
Wow.
My most recent experience came from oil and gas. I fulfilled the role of controller, grew into the CFO role. And to your comment about the hats, I can certainly relate. I think I was wearing both hats for a while, which in hindsight was a wonderful experience. So, but the island thing, that's a good observation, Jason. And you can at times feel kind of chained to the business, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what I really enjoyed in my years as a CFO was actually interacting with our clients, interacting with the operations team inside the business. Getting outside of the office, so to speak, a little bit, developing those relationships that we could, lean on for years to come. And so, being in the CFO role, though, however, to your point, a lot of things kind of come across the desk, and you can feel isolated at times. So it takes a special effort, right, to get out there and look for a network or people to talk to while you're trying to fulfill that same role as well. So.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that when you transitioned from controller to CFO, there was a very extensive training program, and like they allowed you like a 12-week learning curve.
You would think so, and I don't think that's the real world in some cases. For me, it was kind of on-the-job training, and I picked up a little bit of both along the way, even while fulfilling a controller role. I had a fantastic mentor that I stepped into, really big shoes to fill, so that was helpful along the way. But you just kind of figure things out as you go. It's about the people that you gain relationships with, right? Things you can learn from them, things you can teach to others. So all this kind of came into sight when we were having discussions about what do we need to do here differently? What can we do to kind of tap into that level of experience that George has and that I had most recently. So
fantastic. Now, George, we're going to pass back to you.
Sure.
Kind of like you're the president of our organization. This is our first show, and what we want is if a CFO is listening or somebody who needs to pass this forward to a CFO, we're going to continuously bring on different CFOs and even different professionals that assist and help CFOs or work in their space to try to bring them education and continuing education. So, but if you had a vision for what you would hope to see this turn into, what would be the ideal vision for what you would hope that this would turn into?
I think that's a great question. The purpose, right?
Right, the purpose.
Before I get to answer that question, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my background and how I come to think that this could be of value. In my career, I have reported to CFOs. I've been a CFO, and CFOs have reported to me.
Right.
So I have a very long history and a very good understanding of that position and that role and the value it could bring an organization. Also, one thing I want to mention is I've been in a very fortunate circumstance where I had a conglomerate and had about eventually 75, 77 companies. We had best practices for the CFOs. So a great CFO, in my opinion, is always looking to figure out one little nugget to how to improve his value as it relates to the organization. And so when I got to see these meetings across the country to share best practices, I saw a credible wealth of knowledge that these CFOs can tap into. And also, you can learn what not to do. You know, a lot of individuals have failed in certain areas, and if you can take a lesson from you and avoid that path, it's priceless, right?
Right.
So, but most CFOs in these privately held businesses don't have access to that. So, I think it's really beneficial to be able to take advantage of that. So, the purpose of this show is a resource, maybe best practices, resource for CFOs to add value and continue progressing in their career and the value add to the organization. You mentioned being on an island. Privately held businesses are run by pioneers, pirates, if you will, almost. As these visionaries, they're off to the races, and the CFO is left to organize it financially, right? And so there's really nobody that they can gain wisdom from for the important piece that they bring to that company,
right,
generally speaking. So the purpose of this is to be a resource, and for there to be a network of sharing of best practices and resources and ideas so they can continue to progress and add value to their organizations.
Now, Sami, I'd be remiss not to ask this, but I mean, obviously, the two of you are brothers. You've probably been at this and really kind of following each other's paths, having a big brother in the space. When you were a new CFO and you were trying to learn the role, mm-hmm. how often did you lean on George?
A lot.
Okay.
Quite a bit. I would come into things. The one thing I would say that was great, and I hope all CFOs really get this amount of trust that was imparted on for me. My business owners trusted me implicitly, and they left the CFO things to me. They let me do it, and so there was a lot of learning there. As I kind of maneuvered through, as I mentioned, I had a mentor that I followed in his steps that was stepping out, and I was stepping in. But George has always been a resource for me because he's 4 years older. He was ahead of the curve from me in most everything, and so we worked together in the past as well. So it was kind of fun. We can kind of bounce some ideas off each other. We've been in the trenches together in some different areas of some pretty cool stories. So great question, and phone a friend for me happened a lot with George, and he was always available, always willing to kind of share his side of things because he had really good experience during the CFO years, but also running businesses.
Absolutely. So now, George, I know we were talking a little bit about kind of your vision and the purpose for this. What are some of the challenges that you think CFOs run into more often than not? You said you've been asked by business owners, you stepped into their place. Give us the day in the life of, because you've been like you said, you've been all three. You've reported, you've worked as one, and then you've worked where they've reported to you.
Right.
And I would imagine there's some pretty consistent challenges that they're faced with that would resonate with our audience. Tell us about those.
Well, I think the role of the CFO is very challenging, especially a privately held business. They can have everything between human resources and technology, along with financials and the finance, right? And so all of those under that umbrella, and then a confidant. But I think what I've discovered in privately held businesses, sometimes the biggest challenge is communication. And so sometimes they're speaking two different languages, I've seen. It's almost like you need an interpreter. You have a CFO that's working hard for the business, and he has a lot to communicate for the betterment of the business. But because of the different skill sets of the visionary, which is generally the business owner, there's a lot of information that's missed between the two. And so that's a big challenge to communicate the value that you have that the business can take advantage of to a visionary that's always on the move. And maybe their schooling wasn't in finance and business acumen. So that's a challenge as well, is to be the interpreter to the business owner and the visionary of all the things that CFO has to offer the business. And so a lot of times that can be a challenge, and it can be quite frustrating. I've talked to a lot of CFOs and they're extremely frustrated just because they can't seem to communicate.
Wow, that's you never think about that, but a lot of times I think about even like, for example, at home, more often than not, where there's a disruption in the marriage is a lack of communication. And like, for example, if you take it, one person maybe is really comfortable talking about money, but the other person doesn't even like to talk about money, and because maybe they didn't grow up around it.
Sure.
And so when you're trying to talk about a budget, it's completely foreign or frustrating, and so then it just becomes it ends in a fight when it really it's like we're just trying to come together on this thing. I can imagine because I've worked around both of you guys when you guys are looking at spreadsheets and we're looking at all these numbers with our clients and all these plans, and you guys are just like, oh yeah, if you put that there, and I'm just trying to keep up with you guys, and I'm thinking to myself, if you guys were now that I'm thinking of that, I'm imagining you being reporting to me going, yeah, it's just like this and this, and I'd be like, what is wrong with you? Like,
I have a funny thing that I'm reflecting on this at this point right now. I was a young kid, but I always had an operational bent, so I was involved in operations, and so I think I had the ability to not just grasp and produce the financial side, but also to understand how to use it operationally and even in the sales category. But I remember, I'm just going to use first names, but there was a bigger company that we acquired, and the gentleman was quite a bit older than me, and he was very seasoned. His name was Walter, and he was the CFO. Awesome guy, and he's really on top of it. And then we both reported to John, which was the president. And John was certainly a salesperson and a visionary, but doesn't have the background schooling as most in the financial space. So literally, when we acquired this company, I was the CFO of a smaller company. We acquired a bigger one. Walter was the CFO there, and so now there was the challenge of how do we combine the two companies and move forward. So Walter literally sat at the table and he would tell John da 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 da, and John would look at me, I was in the middle of them, and say, well, what Walter's saying is, and then I would say, and he goes, oh, well, Walter, da 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 da, and Walter would look at me, what did he mean? And literally he goes, well, what John means is, and then I would literally translate. And so eventually, and it was almost funny, I really expected, at the end of the conversation for Walter to say, can you please tell John? Or John, can you please tell Walter? And so literally, it's very comical, but it's like two ships passing, like you mentioned in a marriage. And so the communication is critical, and that can be done verbally, but also it can be done in maybe some reporting packages that are tilted more towards a visionary and a non-business practiced individual, if that makes sense.
Right.
But I think as it relates to the show, these common challenges, there may be ways that CFOs have crossed that barrier. Some may have better natural skill sets than others, but others may really have been struggle with it and had a breakthrough in maybe how they're communicating some of that data. And that's just an example maybe how the show of bringing in a community together and sharing best practices and our hopes of kind of bolstering that position and the value to our clients, which are the business owners.
Great. Well, I know our vision, right, Sami, is that we would want to take the show as a kickoff point, but then have that translate to real life or in-person forums that would also then be led by bringing in advisors to then help support it. So what we'd love to see is, and then also move to a virtual forum where if I'm a CFO and I'm struggling with something and I'm trying to find an answer, I can have a community where I can ask that question, a safe space. Right, where I can go in and ask questions. And that's what we want this to become, right?
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And hopefully we can leverage technology today to get our message out there, but then if we can build a database of hundreds of thousands maybe of CFOs out there who are working in concert with each other, then I think a lot of these questions can be solved. I see a future discussion or future forum on how to communicate to a visionary. I think we can do an entire series on
how
how
I was
do you do
thinking
that.
when George was talking, for sure.
Yeah.
I could relate.
Yeah.
So I think that's. I think you and I, Jason, share the same vision for this, and it's as big as we can get it to be, and is powerful of a resource as we can, have for these CFOs, I think it's just going to be a great place for them. Safe space, you said. I like that. I mean, there's multiple industries, multiple verticals represented in this, and so it's going to be fun to hear across those different spaces, and how they can each leverage each other, right, to be a resource for each other, and that, like you mentioned, the safe space. I think that's going to be critical for this, is just to give them an area to learn, right, to teach and to learn and to grow. So
and to share the stories. I think it's really interesting to learn for each of their CFOs and what their story is and little what they're doing. I think that can be added to the conversation as well.
Well, I think I can already tell you right now, right? I've got lined up for the show and people that we're bringing on. We've got a gentleman who's he started his life completely healthy and has now had gone through medical challenges and some battles, and now he's in a wheelchair, but he's a competitive athlete in a wheelchair, about the most dynamic person you'd ever spend time with. Can't wait to get him on the show, so he's going to be fantastic. We've got a woman who's championing really the kind of the mental health aspects of what it takes to be an executive. Probably one of the more dynamic female CFOs you could ever meet, yet at the same time understands the importance of taking care of your your well-being. I mean, you guys, today we're it's almost like you can't raise your hand and say I need help, right? And so and I think what we want to do is create a space where people can say I do need help. Sometimes it's okay to need help, and it doesn't mean you're not good at your job. Like we talked about earlier, I've since I've been at this organization, I've known 2 CFOs who were controllers that went into CFOs inside my circle, and like I was saying facetiously earlier, they got a new title, they got a job pay raise, they got higher levels of expectations on day one, yet at the same time, no one said, okay, well here's your onboarding package and how we're going to help get you from point A. They just said, okay, now you're CFO, here's your raise. By the way, I need more from you.
Sure.
Now figure it out.
And oftentimes they don't even know what the more is.
They don't. Yeah, right. What is the more?
But I'll also say I think there's phases of CFOs, maturity in the position. One is you got to get your arms around everything that's expected of you and all the different things that you're tasked with, and it's your responsibilities. As we mentioned before, in probably health space, sometimes that's even the CIO position with technology. That could be human resources, along with closing the books, and then the banking relationships and so forth, and maybe even the reporting and forecasting, things of that nature. And I think step one is to master those, right, and get best practices and maybe some good understanding, which we've been discussing. But then really the next phase is how can they be contributor to the future, maybe in even a new path. So I think part of this reason for this show and this network community is to bring new ideas of strategies. Maybe strategies to have to retain their top executive, for example, or maybe some interesting strategies for entity type or tax strategies. And so I think the phase 2 would be not just grasp their hands around what's expected of them, but how do they go above and beyond and be a superstar and bring new ideas to the business that otherwise wouldn't have been able to do that.
Sure.
And so I think that's what this show is about as well, is maybe exploring new ideas that they could pick and choose from to implement into their business.
Right.
And perhaps we can give them connections along the way, right? Give them valuable connections, give them new resources that they can lean on in their day-to-day, new information, new individuals, new people to network with, right? New resources along the way. So
fantastic. Well, as we get near kind of wrapping up, this discussion, George, I would love to get kind of your ideas. If there was 5, or maybe just a couple of, 5's probably the wrong word. If there were a few things that you'd want to leave as some leave behinds for for somebody who was a CFO. If you said, hey, if I'm a CFO, whether I'm new, old, what are the maybe the most critical components that you've seen from your journey that a CFO could take as a takeaway from this discussion today?
I think there's multiple. I think good communication, as we've mentioned, with the business owners, and that could be complex as there could be different personalities involved. But the business owners and the communication with the CFO is really critical. If that hasn't been solved, that needs to be some type of path, right, to be able to add value, or else there's a lot of value that's being missed. Secondly is, how do you continue to grow in an area where you don't have maybe a natural mentor, or you don't even have peers? And in a business of the sizes that we're discussing, you need to reach above and beyond your daily task in order to mature and to be able to be the best of what you have to offer. And I really believe that. It's very powerful. Because of the grasp of the business acumen and the financials, they should be able to be quick to determine some really low hanging fruit, maybe even in the business to implement, to really be, I love it, being rock stars or heroes, right?
Right.
Just not doing compliance and recording, but also altering the profitability path perhaps going forward, or reducing risk or eliminating risk in the business in certain areas. So I think that's also key. But really is to sometimes they're on the right track and they're pioneered it on their own, as you mentioned, as Island. So sometimes just be able to get assurance and seeing that other people have been there and they've done that successfully gives them confidence to continue down that path.
Right.
So I think that's crucial as well. And so the main point really is to be able to communicate with the business owner, but also to provide that value and to get ideas that's outside of your daily task, because that you can be such a more of a resource as a community than you can by yourself. And I think that's what they should be looking for in this organization. Sami, also you pointed out something that's really interesting too, is having really great network resources, whether it's for finance or for technology or for whatever the case may be. Cost cutting in different areas can be crucial, and maybe even a shortcut. We talk about time to market. Time is money, and if somebody's already vetted out maybe some of those paths, at least your due diligence may be shortened. To be able to talk to some of these networks, and maybe there's some other CFOs in the group that've used these vendors or solutions or strategies, and they can get feedback.
Sure.
And try to kind of like a star rating.
Oh yeah,
4.5 out of 5-star rating or so. Just to get confidence to move forward.
I can think of multiple times in my role that when I finally meet somebody, you finally meet somebody and you say, I wish I would have met him 5 years ago, right? So maybe we can add some of that in, right? Give them some resources that way. So.
Sam, is there anything that I missed that you want to make sure we capture today from George in our time with him?
The only thing maybe that just to kind of cap it off, it may be fun for us to hear. How did you transition, or why, from a CFO to becoming a business owner? What was your drive?
Well, I think it's interesting. The drive was before I became a CFO, and that is I kind of identified as an entrepreneur, if that's politically correct.
Politically correct?
But
it is today. You can identify as anything.
Well, before I was an entrepreneur, I identified as an entrepreneur, really meaning that was my goal. And so that's the direction I took. So my goal all along was maybe to move an entrepreneurial spot. And I recognized the value that a CFO has in that process. So that was one of the ones that I did. Also, I really like not only recording the past, but I like impacting the future. And depending on the leeway you have as a CFO, I really believe that you can be part of impacting the future, and you could become the number one confidant of the business owners. And I think that's really, so for me, once I became that number one confidant and I was impacting the future, it was an easier step to move into the entrepreneurial role, right? Because just working from that and learning from them, it was able to make that leap. So it was my goal all along. But I got more and more excited about it in the CFO role once I became a future impactor as well. And so then that's what helped me, Sami, make that leap over.
And either way, you're a trusted advisor then, you're a trusted advisor now, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a key component.
And I think that's the role too is, what do you say, trusted advisor? Advisor, people have to listen, but, you're trying to add value is really what we do. And here at our company, Jason, you mentioned the president of the company, really what we produce is education, and we produce education to allow people to feel confident about making decisions going forward, and that's very common with the CFO. And what I mean by that is a business owner, if it's not their natural fit, but yet they have to make decisions for the future, that could cause a lot of anxiety. It's a very stressful place to be in. So you need a confidant like a CFO to give them the information, to educate them based on the facts, that gives them the confidence of moving forward. And so I think it's a natural fit between the two.
Nice. Yeah, and it really, we always say we're your personal CFO, and it's so it just bodes well for not only your experience but the value in both places, both in the business and then also personally, and how those two things blend. Because for a business owner, they're personal, it's all one thing. So, I was going to say, as we look to grow the show, we're going to start, encouraging the audience or those that are tuning in, this is our first one, right? So we just wanted to kind of take this time out, really kind of introduce the idea and the concept. As we move forward, it'll probably be more, I don't want to say agenda driven, but more focused and centered around a specific topic, right? Sammy, I know we have some great ideas, things that you're about. What are some of the ideas and topics that you think we could bring to some of our upcoming episodes?
Yeah, so we're really excited to get it rolled out. The name of this is the CFO Story. So for starters, we really do like hearing stories of CFOs, business owners, all the same. We really thrive from hearing those things. And so, we have our client base that we get excited about their stories. So the first thing I would say is let's find out their stories, right? And let's show their stories and give them an opportunity to tell their stories. Some other things we discussed is, and George briefly mentioned earlier, what about some best practices? What are some things, despite what industry you're in as a CFO, what are some things that you can share that you think is a best practice that others may find valuable? And it could be the smallest thing. It could be something outside the numbers, right? So, and here's what I mean by that. We've talked around a lot of kind of what fits inside of a role as a CFO, and a lot of it has to do with numbers. And people think, you're a numbers guy. Well, that's part of it, right?
Right.
That's part of it. There's a psychological aspect to it. You have to be tough mentally. You have to be patient. George talked about the communication. I think we could really get some mileage out of those conversations. How to communicate with a visionary, right? They may speak a little bit different language than a CFO, and that's okay. These guys, we need visionaries and we need CFOs, right?
Right.
And how can they mesh? And so I think there's a lot of conversations we can have there. So best practices, maybe challenges. What are some top challenges that the CFOs are seeing today in the market, in the economy, in their specific role, in their industry? Let's give them some opportunities to kind of chew on those things a little bit and say, man, are you guys fighting this too? Because this is something we're really seeing, and things that we see and we talk about as well, like inflation, simple things, right? But everyone can kind of feel the pain from it. So
awesome. So I'm going to use that as a way to kind of transition out of the show and really kind of push back to the audience. If this is the first time you're tuning in, which actually technically it is, so it is 100% the first time you're tuning in. A couple things. Number one, pass this on to another CFO, right? Get them engaged early and quick, and because the faster we can grow this, the faster we can build some momentum, and the quicker this network will become. Number two, give us your ideas. You can reach Sami Abboud, Abboud, on LinkedIn. Jason Lee, that's not that hard. Lee. It's pretty simple, but don't mix it up. It could be it's not that complicated. And then his brother, the lesser attractive of the two, George Abboud, the president of our organization. And then also, the faster you can help us to grow, the quicker we can hit the boss man up for a studio, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you think maybe? So it's all hinging on you guys. So we're going to need your help. Again, Jason Lee, Sami Abboud, we're all three with Exponent Advisors. We're joined by our president George Abboud today. Again, stay tuned into us. You'll be able to follow us on all of your favorite channels. For our podcast, it's the CFO Story. And again, we're going to ask you just to please pay it forward. Send it out to another CFO that you know needs to hear it, needs a network. Let's go out there and we're going to do everything we can to serve them.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having me.